The sand didn't just get in your eyes, it got into everything. The engine filters, the gun mechanisms, the water canteens. Inside the shallow gun pit, Sergeant Charles Calliston wiped the grit from his face and looked through the sight of his 6-pounder anti-tank gun. 50 German Panzers rolled toward him across the desert floor. 100 yards. Close enough to see the commander's face through the cupola. Close enough to count the rivets on the armor plate. His hands didn't shake. They never did. His father had been a watchmaker back in Lancashire, and he taught young Charles that precision was everything. Every detail mattered. Hurry was the enemy of perfection. Now, with 1/2 tons of German steel bearing down on his position, those lessons were all that stood between survival and annihilation. Behind him, Lieutenant Colonel Victor Turner was carrying ammunition boxes. The colonel's head was wrapped in a bloody bandage. He'd been wounded an hour ago but refused to stop, refused to hide, refused to let his men fight alone. They had 3 guns still working in this sector, 10 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition left for the entire position. The temperature had reached 40 degrees Celsius. They'd run out of water at noon. 70% of the battalion was already dead or wounded. 19 small anti-tank guns against the most powerful armored force Rommel had in North Africa. 300 British soldiers surrounded by more than 150 German and Italian tanks. The odds were impossible. The mathematics were clear. They should have been dead hours ago. But in the next 16 hours, they would destroy 52 enemy tanks. They would change the outcome of the Second World War in the Western Desert. And it all began with a mistake in the darkness. This is the story of Outpost Snipe, October 27, 1942. The day the Desert Rats learned that courage alone wasn't enough. You needed the right weapon, the right terrain, and the discipline to wait until you could see the whites of their eyes. Subscribe now, because this story has never been told like this before. 2 years, that's how long Lieutenant Colonel Victor Buller Turner had been fighting in the North African desert. 2 years of watching the Germans win. 2 years of sending men into battle, knowing their tanks were outgunned, their tactics were outdated, their chances were poor. 2 years of writing letters to widows and mothers trying to explain why their sons and husbands had died in a wasteland of sand and rock 3,000 miles from home. Turner came from a military family. His grandfather had served. His father had served. His brothers served. The profession of arms wasn't just a career for the Turners. It was a calling, a duty that ran in the blood. But duty didn't make the losses any easier to bear. June 1942, the Battle of Gazala. Turner had watched an entire tank battalion destroyed in 45 minutes. 60 Crusader tanks burning like torches across the desert floor. The German 88mm guns had opened fire from 2,000 yards. The British 2-pounder guns could barely scratch paint at 600 yards. 2,000 yards versus 600 yards. It wasn't a disadvantage. It was an execution. He'd pulled 12 tankers from burning wrecks that day. Listened to them scream from burns that covered 60, 70, 80% of their bodies. 8 of them died before sunrise. The other 4 wished they had. Turner had written in his diary that night, "How can I ask men to climb into these metal coffins? How can I send them to dig when I know the enemy can kill them before they even see the flash?" But he kept sending them. Because that was the job. Because retreat meant losing Egypt, losing the Suez Canal, losing the oil fields of the Middle East, losing the war. Now it was October. Montgomery had arrived. New American Sherman tanks had arrived. New 6-pounder anti-tank guns had arrived. Guns that could finally penetrate German armor. Guns that gave them a fighting chance. And Montgomery had a plan, an audacious, brutal plan called Operation Lightfoot. They weren't going to outmaneuver Rommel anymore. They were going to stand and grind him into the sand. Turner stood in his tent on the evening of October 26th, looking at a map of a small depression in the desert called Snipe. A bowl-shaped piece of ground roughly 1,000 yards long and 500 yards wide located 3 miles behind German lines. His orders were simple. Take Snipe, hold it for 24 hours. Use it as a pivot point for the armored brigade's advance. Simple. Except they'd be surrounded. Except they'd have no armor support. Except if the Germans discovered them, they'd throw everything they had at the position. Except it was basically a suicide mission dressed up in tactical language. Brigadier Bosville had given him the option to refuse. Turner had accepted immediately. Not because he wanted to die, not because he thought it would be easy, but because someone had to do it. And if it was going to be done, it needed to be done by men who wouldn't break when the Panzers came. He sat down and wrote a letter to his wife. He didn't seal it, didn't know if he'd send it or burn it. The letter said, "If you're reading this, I failed, but I hope my failure still meant something." Across the camp, Sergeant Charles Calliston sat on an ammunition crate reading a letter from his wife, Mary. She was pregnant, due in February, their first child. She'd sent him a photograph from her last doctor's visit. Grainy, unclear, but he could just make out the shape of the baby. His child, a child he'd never met, a child who might grow up never knowing their father's face. Calliston had worked in a textile mill before the war, operating looms that required precision down to the millimeter. His father's training had served him well. The old man had taught him that every detail mattered, that rushing led to mistakes, that patience was the difference between success and failure. Those lessons had made Calliston the best gun layer in the battalion. 95% hit rate. When Calliston fired, the target died. But statistics didn't matter if you didn't survive to take the shot. And tomorrow's mission had the kind of odds that made statistics irrelevant. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in his breast pocket, along with the photograph. If he died tomorrow, at least they'd know he was thinking of them at the end. He thought, "I'm not fighting because I hate what's in front of me. I'm fighting because I love what's behind me." Mary, the baby, home, the mill. The ordinary life he'd taken for granted. That's what this was about. Not glory, not adventure, just getting home. Major Tom Bird walked through the camp checking on his guns. S Company, the anti-tank specialists, 19 6-pounder guns in the crews to man them. Some of these boys were veterans, men who'd been in the desert since 1940, men who knew the smell of cordite and burning oil the way other men knew the smell of their mother's cooking. But some were new, fresh out of training. This would be their first real engagement, their first time watching a German Panzer bear down on them with murder in its steel heart. Bird had a reputation. They called him Dickie Boy. He'd earned it through aggressive night patrols deep into German territory. He'd captured over 200 prisoners in the last 6 months, not through firepower, but through audacity, through showing up where the enemy didn't expect and hitting them before they could react. He believed that defense didn't mean passivity. Sometimes the best way to defend was to attack so hard they forgot they were supposed to be attacking you. But tomorrow wouldn't be about attack. Tomorrow would be about standing still while hell rolled toward you, about having the discipline to let tanks get close enough to kill you before you fired, about trusting your weapon and your training when every instinct screamed to run. He stopped at one gun pit where a young private was checking his ammunition for the 3rd time. The kid's hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, from anticipation, from knowing that in 12 hours his life would change forever. One way or another, Bird put a hand on the boy's shoulder, said, "Trust your sergeant, trust your gun, and remember we're the rats. We survive what wants us dead." The boy looked up, nodded, went back to counting rounds. 2,300 hours. Time to move. The German 88mm anti-aircraft gun could kill a British tank from 2,000 yards. This wasn't theory. This wasn't estimation. This was mathematical certainty proven by 2 years of dead tankers and burning steel. The shell left the barrel at 820 meters per second. It could penetrate 110 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards. British Crusader tanks had 40 millimeters of armor at best. The math was simple. The math was brutal. The math was why the British kept losing. Erwin Rommel hadn't invented the 88. He'd just realized what it could do. The gun was designed to shoot down aircraft. Heavy, powerful, accurate. But Rommel had looked at that gun and thought, what if we pointed it at tanks instead? What if we let the British come to us, then killed them from distances they couldn't even shoot back? The result had been 2 years of British defeat. Tobruk, Gazala, Mersa Matruh, every battle the same pattern. British tanks charging forward with a cavalry spirit and obsolete guns, German 88s waiting in concealment, flash, crack, dead crew, burning tank. Repeat until the British broke and retreated. Repeat until the survivors lost hope. The British 2-pounder gun was effective at 600 yards, on a good day, with perfect conditions, against the side armor of a German tank. Not the front, Never the front. The front armor laughed at two-pounder shells, deflected them like a man brushing off mosquitoes. So British tank crews had to get close, had to expose themselves to German fire for over a mile before they could even attempt to fight back, had to watch their friends die while they charged forward knowing their turn was coming. The tankers had a saying. They called their Crusader tanks Ronson lighters because they lit first time every time. Dark humor, gallows humor, the kind of joke you told when the alternative was screaming. The survival rate for a British tank crew was measured in days, not months. 4 days average before your tank was hit. 70% casualty rate if you were hit. The smart ones requested transfers to the infantry. Better to die on your feet with a rifle than burn alive in a steel coffin. Turner had seen it all, had smelled the combination of burning oil and burning flesh that never quite left your nostrils, had heard the screams of men trapped in tanks' ammunition cooking off around them, knowing rescue meant pulling them out as charred remnants, barely recognizable as human, had written those letters home, trying to explain that their son died, quickly, died bravely, died for something that mattered when the truth was he died screaming in agony for his mother, while his skin melted off his bones. But June 1942 had been the worst. Gazala. The Germans had been outnumbered. The British had more tanks, more men, more supplies. On paper, it should have been a British victory. On paper meant nothing in the desert. Turner's brigade had been ordered to attack a German position. Standard tactics, charge forward. Overwhelm them with numbers, except the Germans weren't there. They'd pulled back, left the ground empty. And when the British tanks rolled forward, thinking they'd won, the 88s opened fire from positions they'd prepared in the flanks. 60 tanks destroyed in 45 minutes. Turner had counted, watched each flash, watched each fireball, watched each crew bail out, some on fire, some shot down by machine guns before they could take 3 steps. Watched the survivors retreat in disorder, the unit shattered morale, destroyed men questioning whether their commanders had any idea what they were doing. He'd rescued 12 men that day, pulled them from burning wrecks. Most were burned so badly he couldn't tell who they were. The smell of cooked meat, human meat, it stayed with you, haunted your dreams, made you wake up gagging. 8 died before morning, despite the morphine, despite the bandages, despite everything the medical officers could do. Burns covering 70–80% of their bodies. No skin left, plasma leaking out, shock setting in. They died badly. They died slow. The 4 who survived wished they hadn't. Faces melted into permanent masks of scar tissue. Hands fused into claws. Lives destroyed at 20 years old. Turner visited them in hospital. Listened to them talk about what they'd lost. Watched them realize they'd never have normal lives again. That night, he'd written in his journal, "How can I keep doing this? How can I send boys to die in machines that can't protect them? How can I keep following orders that I know will end in slaughter?" But he kept doing it, because the alternative was surrender, was letting Rommel win, was handing North Africa to the Nazis, was potentially losing the entire war. September 1942. Montgomery arrived, different from Auchinleck, different from the commanders before. Montgomery didn't talk about maneuver, didn't talk about outflanking, talked about standing and fighting, about grinding the enemy down, about making them pay for every yard, about attrition, about turning the desert into an abattoir where German armor came to die. And Montgomery brought gifts, American Sherman tanks. Finally something that could trade punches with German Panzer IVs. Finally something with armor thick enough to survive a hit, guns powerful enough to kill at range. Not enough of them, never enough, but better than Crusaders, better than suicide, and 6-pounder anti-tank guns, 57 millimeter, could penetrate 74 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards, could kill a Panzer IV from the front, could finally give British gunners a weapon that worked, a weapon that let them fight instead of die. But weapons alone weren't enough. Gazala had proven that. The British had been outfought, outthought, outmaneuvered. Rommel was a genius. His Africa Corps were veterans. They knew the desert, knew how to use terrain, how to lure enemies into traps, how to win battles they should have lost. Montgomery's plan was audacious. Operation Lightfoot. Don't try to beat Rommel at maneuver. Beat him at attrition. Pin him against the coast where he can't use his mobility. Grind him down with superior numbers and firepower. Make him commit his armor to defend ground. Then kill his armor with anti-tank guns in prepared positions. The plan required bait, required something deep in German territory that would force Rommel to attack, required men willing to sit in the open and let Panzers roll toward them so those Panzers would die on British guns, required outpost snipe. Turner stood in Brigadier Bosville's tent on the evening of October 26. The map showed a small oval depression 3 miles behind German defensive lines. A natural bowl in the ground, good fields of fire, some scrub for concealment. Nothing else, just sand and rock and emptiness. Bosville explained, 2nd Battalion Rifle Brigade, 300 men, 19 6-pounder guns. March through the minefields tonight. Reach snipe before dawn. Dig in, wait. When the Germans counterattack Montgomery's breakthrough, they'll have to deal with you first. You'll be a thorn in their rear. You'll force them to divert armor. You'll kill as many as you can. You'll hold for 24 hours while 24th Armored Brigade exploits the gap you create. Turner understood what wasn't being said. You'll probably die there. You'll be surrounded with no support. If the Germans mass against you, you won't survive. But your death will matter. Your sacrifice will save others. Bosville offered the out. Said Turner didn't have to accept. Could assign it to someone else. Turner accepted before the brigadier finished the sentence. Not from bravado. Not from death wish. From mathematics. Someone had to do this. If it needed doing better, it was done by professionals who understood what they were getting into. Better the 2nd Rifle Brigade veterans of the desert men who'd learned how to survive than some fresh unit that would panic when the shooting started. He gathered his officers at 2200 hours. Major Hugo summoned his second-in-command, best friend since Sandhurst, the man who kept morale up when everything went to hell, who read poetry to the men in the evenings, who believed that staying human mattered even in the middle of mechanized slaughter. Major Tom Bird, commander of S Company and the anti-tank guns, aggressive, creative, fearless. The kind of officer who led from the front because he couldn't imagine asking men to go where he wouldn't. Lieutenant Jack Toms, young, recently promoted, still trying to prove himself, haunted by a mistake back in July where 2 men died because he hesitated. Determined never to hesitate again. And the sergeants, the backbone of the British Army. Men like Calistan, who'd been in the desert since 1940, who knew every trick, who could read terrain like books, who made the difference between units that fought and units that broke. Turner laid it out plain, showed them the map, showed them the route, showed them where they'd be and what they'd face, didn't sugarcoat, didn't promise it would be easy, said this is close to a one-way trip. But if we don't do this, Montgomery's breakthrough fails. If we don't do this, Rommel holds. If we don't do this, the war continues. Silence. Men looking at maps. Men doing mathematics in their heads. Men understanding what morning would bring. Bird spoke first. Said Colonel, we've followed you for 2 years. We trust you. The question isn't whether we trust you. The question is whether we trust these new 6-pounders. Turner smiled for the first time that evening. Said Tom, they're the best guns we've ever had, and you've got the best gunners in North Africa. If anyone can make this work, it's us. Salmon produced his worn poetry book, the one he carried everywhere. Kipling, always Kipling, read aloud. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. The poem continued. The officers listened. Some had heard it before. Some mouthed the words. All understood why Salmon read it now. Because tomorrow they'd need every word, every lesson, every ounce of courage those verses could provide. The meeting ended. Officers returned to their units. Turner sat alone for a moment looking at the map of Snipe. A small oval, a piece of ground that meant nothing strategically, a depression in an infinite desert. But tomorrow it would mean everything. Tomorrow it would be where they made their stand. He thought about Ghazala, about the burning tanks, about the screams, about the letters he'd written to mothers, wives. Thought tomorrow I might be the one they're writing about. Tomorrow someone might be telling my wife that I died bravely, died, quickly died for something that mattered. Then he pushed the thought away, folded the map, checked his pistol. Time to move. 21:40 hours, October 23rd, 1942. The sky to the west turned orange. Not sunset. Artillery. 882 British guns firing simultaneously. The heaviest bombardment since the First World War. The ground shook. The air vibrated. Men miles away felt the concussion through their boots. The shells arced overhead. 15,000 rounds in 20 minutes. High explosive. Armor-piercing. Smoke. Everything the British had dumped onto German positions in a mechanical storm designed to shatter defenders and break morale. From the forward trenches, soldiers watched the horizon strobe. Flashes like lightning. Clouds of dust and smoke rising hundreds of feet. The sound wasn't individual explosions anymore. It was one continuous roar, like standing next to a waterfall made of violence. Then silence. Relative silence. Ears ringing. The smell of cordite drifting back on the wind. Coppery. Bitter. The smell of modern war. 200 hours. The infantry went forward. Shannon Corps, Australian, New Zealand, British divisions, advancing into what the Germans called the Devil's Gardens, 5 miles deep, 8,000 yards of pure nightmare. 500,000 mines, German Teller mines that could blow the tracks off tanks, S-mines that jumped up and detonated at waist height, shredding men with ball bearings, wooden mines that metal detectors couldn't find, booby traps, wire, death waiting in the sand. The combat engineers went first, crawling, prodding the ground with bayonets at 30-degree angles, inch by inch, moving at the speed of terror. Electronic mine detectors were useless. Too much metal from the bombardment, too much interference. Just men and knives and prayers. 100 yards per hour. That's how fast they could clear a lane. 100 yards through 5 miles of mines. The mathematics were impossible, but they kept going because the alternative was staying still while German artillery found their range. The casualties started immediately. A young sapper, 19 years old, missed a mine by an inch. The next man didn't. The blast threw him 15 feet, killed him instantly. His friends kept crawling. Because stopping meant dying anyway. At least moving forward had purpose. By 02:15, the first lanes were reported clear. The armor rolled forward. Sherman tanks, Crusaders in support, carriers, trucks, the entire weight of British armored formations funneling through narrow corridors in the minefields, choking on dust, dust so thick it hung in the air like fog, 18 inches deep in places, churned up by tracks and wheels and the passage of thousands of men. 02:30, the lead Sherman hit a mine. The lane wasn't clear. Someone had missed one. Or a bombardment had shifted a mine into the cleared path. Didn't matter why. The result was the same. Tank immobilized. Traffic stopped. Everything behind it stuck. Drivers tried to reverse. Couldn't. Trucks jammed against each other. Men shouting. Officers trying to restore order. Radio nets clogged with confused reports. And then the German 88s opened fire. They'd been waiting, watching. The Germans weren't fools. They knew where the cleared lanes had to be. They'd registered their guns on those coordinates days ago. Now they just had to pull triggers and watch British armor burn. Flash, 1,000 yards away, invisible in the darkness. Then crack. Then the sound of metal tearing. Then fire. A Sherman brewing up. Ammunition cooking off. Secondary explosions lighting the night. Silhouetting every other vehicle in the area, making them perfect targets. The massacre should have been complete. Should have been Gazala all over again. British armor trapped. German guns killing at leisure. The breakthrough failing in the minefields before it even began. Except this time something was different. This time Montgomery didn't order a retreat. Didn't pull back to regroup. He pushed forward harder. More engineers forward. Clear alternate lanes. Get the armor moving again. Accept the casualties. Accept the chaos. Keep pushing because stopping meant losing. Keep pushing because Rommel was watching, waiting for the British to break like they always broke. Keep pushing to prove that this time was different. By dawn, 200 tanks were stuck in the minefields. 40 had been destroyed. 500 infantry casualties. The breakthrough had failed. The lanes weren't clear. The armor wasn't through. Rommel's main line still held. Montgomery's staff gathered around maps calculating, recalculating. The plan called for a breakthrough in 48 hours. They'd made it 400 yards in 6 hours. The numbers didn't work. At this rate, they'd never break through. At this rate, Rommel would have time to reinforce, time to counterattack, time to win. But Montgomery didn't change the plan, didn't retreat, gave a simple order. Continue the attack. We're not stopping. We're not going back. We grind forward until something breaks. And when Rommel counterattacks, we'll be ready. October 26th, the stalemate continued. British forces held the minefields but couldn't push through. German forces held their main defensive line but couldn't push the British back. Both sides bled. Both sides waited for the other to crack first. Rommel had just returned from Germany. He'd been on sick leave recovering from illness. Flew back when the British attack started. Arrived to find his forces under pressure but holding. Assessed the situation with the clarity that had made him a legend. The British were stuck. They'd committed their armor but couldn't deploy it. This was the moment to counterattack. Crush them in the minefields. Break their morale. Win the battle. But Rommel had a problem. Fuel. Always fuel. His supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles across desert and sea. British submarines and aircraft had been sinking his supply ships. He had enough fuel for one major counterattack. Maybe two if he was careful. He had to choose his moment perfectly. Couldn't waste his precious armor on a failed attack. So he waited, watched, let the British exhaust themselves against his defenses, conserved his Panzers for the killing blow. And while he waited, Montgomery was preparing something Rommel didn't expect. Outpost snipe. Turner received the final briefing at 1800 hours on October 26. The attack had been going for 3 days. Progress was minimal. Montgomery needed something to force Rommel's hand. Needed the Germans to commit their armor to a counterattack. Needed them to attack into prepared British positions instead of defending from prepared German positions. The solution was to put a strong combat team deep in German rear areas. Make it threatening enough that Rommel couldn't ignore it. Make it weak enough that he'd think he could destroy it quickly. Then kill his Panzers when they came. It was a trap, and Turner's battalion was the bait. Brigadier Bosville didn't hide it. Said Victor, this is dangerous. You'll be 3 miles behind their lines. Surrounded, no armor support. If they mass against you, extraction will be impossible. Turner nodded. Said, I understand, sir. We'll make it count. Bosville added, you don't have to do this. I can find another unit. Turner met his eyes, said, no, sir. My men know the desert. They know how to fight. If this needs doing, we're the ones to do it. We'll take snipe, we'll hold it, and we'll bleed Rommel dry. 22:30 hours. Turner gathered his men. 300 soldiers, veterans and rookies mixed together. Some had been in the desert since 1940. Some had arrived last month. Some would die before sunrise. None of them knew which group they'd be in. He didn't give a speech. Didn't need to. Just laid out the mission. Showed them the map. Showed them the route. Showed them where they were going and why. Let them understand what they were being asked to do. Then Salmon stepped forward with his poetry book. Read Kipling one more time. The words hung in the desert air. Words about keeping your head, about trusting yourself, about filling every minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. Words that had sustained British soldiers for generations. Words that might sustain them through tomorrow. When Salmon finished, Turner said, we move in 30 minutes. Check your weapons. Check your ammunition. And gentlemen, get ready. Tomorrow we show Rommel what we can do. The column formed up. Universal carriers in front with Bren guns, infantry in carriers and trucks, Portee trucks carrying the 19 6-pounder guns, ammunition trucks. The whole battalion strung out in a line that stretched for hundreds of yards, moving into darkness, moving toward a position they'd never seen, moving toward a fight they might not survive. Zero movement. The engines coughed to life, diesel smoke drifting, the smell of oil and dust and cordite from distant fighting. The lead carrier rolled forward. The others followed. Into the night. Into the unknown. Into history. 2300 hours, October 26, 1942. The column moved through silence, broken only by diesel engines and the crunch of tracks on sand. Calliston sat on the Portee truck, his 6-pounder secured behind him, watching the desert slide past in shades of gray and black. The moon was full. A hunter's moon, his father would have called it. Bright enough to see by, bright enough to be seen. They were moving through the lanes cleared by the engineers, narrow corridors through the Devil's Gardens marked by white tape that glowed faintly in the moonlight. On either side, unmarked ground, 500,000 minds waiting for one wrong turn, one moment of inattention, one navigation error. The truck ahead hit something, not a mine, a crater from the bombardment. The vehicle lurched. Calistan gripped the mounting rail. The six-pounder shifted on its platform. For a moment, he thought it would slide off to taking half the crew with it, but the chains held. The truck recovered. They kept moving. Past the wreckage of the initial assault, burned-out tanks, British and German, both sitting like monuments to failed attacks and successful defenses. Some still smoking. The acrid smell of burned rubber and melted metal drifting through the night air. Bodies too, though the burial details had cleared most of them. Some they'd missed. Some too close to mines to risk recovery. The desert would take them in time. Sand and wind and sun reducing them to bones, then dust. Private Davies, the loader, was 19. This was his first real action. He joined the battalion 3 weeks ago, fresh from training in Cairo. Now he sat next to Calistan, trying not to stare at the corpses, trying to breathe through his mouth so he wouldn't smell them, trying to be brave. Calistan didn't tell him it got easier. That would be a lie. It never got easier. You just got better at pushing it down, better at thinking about something else, better at pretending the dead were just objects, not people who had mothers and wives and children waiting for letters that would never come. Instead, he checked the gun again. Breech clean, sights zeroed at the last opportunity, ammunition secured, 52 rounds of armor piercing, 10 rounds of high explosive. Every round counted, every round mattered. In the desert, you learn to make every shot perfect because you might not get a second chance. 100 hours. They'd been moving for 2 hours, should have covered 3 miles, might have covered 2. Hard to tell in the darkness. Navigation was by compass and guesswork. The landmarks on the map didn't match the reality on the ground. The bombardment had changed the terrain, craters where there should have been flat sand. Ridges collapsed. The desert was never static. Every battle reshaped it. Byrd's carrier was in the lead, probing forward. They'd gone through the British minefields. Now they were in no man's land. Then through the German forward positions. Enemy territory. Every shadow could be a German patrol. Every sound could be the prelude to ambush. The carriers had Bren guns mounted, good for suppression, useless against armor. If they ran into Panzers now and column in the dark, it would be slaughter. But the Germans were quiet. Either they hadn't detected the column or they were letting it pass, waiting to see what it would do. Rommel was a patient hunter. He'd let prey walk into his traps before springing them. Maybe this was a trap. Maybe Snipe was a killing ground the Germans had prepared, waiting for the British to occupy it so they could destroy the battalion at leisure. Turner was in the command carrier map spread across his knees, trying to correlate the terrain with the lines on paper. Nothing matched. The depression they were supposed to find, the oval bowl called Snipe, could be anywhere in a square mile of desert. In daylight, they'd find it easily. In darkness, with dust and smoke, obscuring stars, with compasses acting strangely near so much metal from the fighting, they were navigating blind. 0330, October 27th. Byrd's carrier stopped. The column halted behind it. Radio crackle. Byrd reporting. Found a depression. Scrub and camel thorn around the edges. Oval-shaped. About the right size. About the right distance from Kidney Ridge behind them. Probably Snipe. Probably. Turner gave the order. Deploy. This was close enough. Dawn was 2 hours away. They needed those 2 hours to dig in, needed darkness to conceal their preparations. Once the sun rose, everything would be visible. Every man, every gun, every weakness in their position. The poor T-trucks moved forward into the depression. The 6-pounders were unlimbered from their traveling position. Crews manhandled them into place around the perimeter. North, west, south, east. All around defense because they didn't know which direction the Germans would come from. Probably all directions once the shooting started. The ground was hard, not sand. Limestone bedrock covered by a thin layer of soil. Pickaxes rang against stone. Shovels scraped and skittered. The men dug anyway. Shallow pits, 18 inches deep in some places. 3 feet in others where they got lucky and found softer ground. Not the 5-foot deep gun pits they'd wanted. not the overhead cover that would protect against artillery. Just shallow scrapes in the earth that might, if they were very lucky, keep them alive a few minutes longer when the shells started falling. Calistan's crew worked in silence. Davies and the two ammunition handlers digging while Calistan positioned the gun, finding the best angle, the best field of fire, checking the traverse left and right, making sure the gun could engage targets across the widest possible arc. Every degree of traverse mattered. Every second of target acquisition time mattered. When the Panzers came, they'd come fast. No time for adjustments, no time for second chances. They camouflaged the position with sand nets in scrub, made it blend into the desert floor. From 100 yards away, invisible. From 50 yards, just another shadow. The British had learned camouflage the hard way. Learned that if the enemy could see you, the enemy could kill you. Learned that invisibility was armor, 0-500. The guns were positioned, 19 6-pounders in a rough circle around the depression, overlapping fields of fire, mutually supporting positions. On paper, it looked good. On paper, it was a textbook defensive setup. Paper didn't account for the fact that they were 3 miles behind enemy lines, surrounded by an enemy who outnumbered and outgunned them with no support and no way to retreat if things went wrong. Turner established his command post in a German dugout they'd found. Previous occupants gone. Occupants either pulled back or killed in the bombardment. The dugout had been a command post for a German engineering unit. Maps still on the walls, orders written in neat Gothic script, someone's coffee cup half full sitting on a makeshift desk. The small details of occupation, the minutiae of war. Salmon joined him, lit a cigarette, said quietly, "Victor, I think we're in the wrong place." Turner looked up from the map. "What makes you say that?" Salmon pointed east. "Kidney Ridge should be visible from here at dawn, higher ground. We should be able to see our own lines. But the ground slope's wrong. We're lower than we should be. I think we're south of the actual snipe position, maybe 800 yards south." Turner studied the map again. The shadows, the terrain. Salmon was probably right. They'd navigated to the wrong depression, found something that looked like snipe but wasn't quite snipe. Close enough for government work, as the Americans said, but wrong. "Does it matter?" Turner asked. Salmon shrugged. "Depends on whether being in the wrong place makes us harder or easier to kill. Won't know until the sun comes up and we see what we're actually facing." Turner folded the map, said, "Then we'll deal with it when the sun comes up. For now we're here. We dig in, we prepare, and we wait." 0545. First light. The sky to the east going from black to gray to pale blue. That moment of transition when the world stops being shadows and becomes real again. When men could see what they were facing. Turner climbed out of the dugout, stood on the lip of the depression, looked around, and felt his stomach drop. They were surrounded. To the north, 1,000 yards away, a German lager. Tank camp, vehicles parked in neat rows. Tents, camouflage netting. Morning cook fires starting to smoke. Turner counted through binoculars. 40 tanks, maybe 50. Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs. 15th Panzer Division. One of Rommel's best units. Professionals. Veterans. Men who'd been fighting since France, since Poland, since the beginning. To the west-northwest, another concentration. 21st Panzer Division. 30 tanks visible. More probably hidden in defilade. Another elite unit. More veterans. More men who knew their trade. To the south-southwest Italian positions. The Littorio Division. M1340s and Semovente self-propelled guns. 20 vehicles he could see. The Italians were less dangerous than the Germans, their tanks lighter, their crews less experienced. But they could still kill you. Dead was dead regardless of which nation pulled the trigger. Total estimate, 100 armored vehicles within 2,000 yards. Maybe more hidden or in dead ground. And in the middle, like a mouse in a field of hawks, 300 British soldiers with 19 anti-tank guns. Byrd joined him on the parapet, looked out, said a word that would have gotten him reprimanded in any other context. Turner didn't reprimand him. The word was entirely appropriate. They studied the positions, the distances, the threat vectors, all the tactical considerations that might keep them alive for the next few hours, or might not. The mathematics were not encouraging. 300 men against thousands. 19 guns against 100 tanks. The only question was whether they'd last long enough to make their deaths meaningful. Turner said, "Tom, look at the slopes." Byrd looked. The depression was deeper than they'd realized in the darkness. Steep-sided, not much, maybe 8 degrees of angle, but enough. Tank guns typically could depress about 8 to 10 degrees below horizontal. If a tank got close to the edge of this depression, came right up to the lip, it wouldn't be able to depress its gun far enough to hit targets in the bottom. Would have to fire over them or back up to get the angle. "That's our edge," Turner said. "We let them get close enough that they can't shoot down at us, close enough that we can shoot up at them. Their belly armor, their side armor, the weak points." Byrd understood immediately. Said, "But that means letting them get within 100 yards, maybe less. That's insane." Turner smiled without humor. Said, "Tom, we're already insane. We're 3 miles behind German lines, outnumbered 30 to 1 with no support. Insanity is our baseline. Might as well be creative with it." The Germans hadn't noticed them yet, hadn't realized there was a British position in their rear. The morning routine continued, men emerging from tents, ablutions, breakfast, the small rituals that kept soldiers sane. That imposed order on chaos. That made you feel human instead of just a weapon pointed at other weapons. Turner knew it wouldn't last. As soon as the sun was fully up, as soon as visibility improved, someone would notice. Would see the vehicles they'd left outside the position, would see movement, would raise the alarm, and then the war would come to them. He sent the carriers and trucks away, ordered them to withdraw back toward British lines. Every vehicle they could evacuate was one less thing to burn when the shooting started, one less target, one less explosion to mark their position. The carriers left carrying prisoners they'd taken during the night, carrying the men who couldn't fight, carrying messages to headquarters that Snipe was occupied and they were waiting. 300 men remained. 19 guns, small arms, a few Bren guns, some mortars, not much, not enough. But what they had, 0345, October 27th. Still dark, though dawn was approaching. The column had been moving for over 4 hours. A sound, diesel engines, coming from the north. The German lager was breaking camp, early, probably orders to move to another position. Part of Rommel's defensive shuffle, moving units to counter British probes. The column was heading south, heading directly toward the British position. Calistan heard them first, put his ear to the ground the way his father had taught him. Sound traveled through earth. You could feel trucks and tanks before you heard them through air. He estimated range by the intensity of vibration. Close, very close, moving this way. He alerted Tom's. Tom's alerted Byrd. Byrd alerted Turner. Word spread along the gun line. Stand to, prepare for contact. No shooting until ordered. Discipline. Wait for the perfect shot. The lead German vehicles appeared out of the darkness. Panzer IVs, long-barreled 75mm guns. Dangerous. Professional. Moving in column one behind another, expecting no threats because this was their rear area, their safe zone, the place behind the lines where soldiers could relax. 300 yards. The British gunners tracked them through sights. Fingers on triggers. Hearts pounding. This was it. First contact. The moment that would reveal their position and start the battle. No going back after this. No second chances. 200 yards. Turner's voice on the radio net. Calm. Steady. The voice of a man who'd done this before. Counting down. Waiting for the perfect moment. Waiting for multiple guns to be on target. So the first volley would be devastating. 180 yards. The lead Panzer IV was so close, Calistan could see the commander in the cupola. Young German officer, probably 25. Handsome, blonde, the propaganda poster version of the master race, scanning the horizon casually, not expecting death, not seeing the British guns dug into the shadows. Turner gave the order. Fire. 4 guns fired simultaneously. The night lit up, muzzle flashed like lightning, the crack of 6-pounders firing. Then the sound of impact, metal on metal. Armor-piercing rounds traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Physics and chemistry combining to punch through steel. The Lead Panzer IV erupted, direct hit to the ammunition storage. The turret blew 20 feet into the air, tumbling, trailing fire. The hull became a furnace. Whoever was inside died instantly. No time to scream, no time to know what killed them. Just alive and then not. The second tank tried to reverse, threw a track in the panic, slewed sideways. Another round hit it in the side armor. Penetrated, brewed up, crew bailing out two of them on fire. Bren guns cut them down before they'd taken 3 steps. War is not merciful to those who hesitate. The rest of the German column scattered, reversed into the darkness, confused, under fire from an unknown position. Officers shouting orders, gunners firing blind into the night, rounds going wide or high. None of them had identified where the British guns were, just knew they were being ambushed. 2 Panzers destroyed, the rest fled. First blood to the British. But now the Germans knew someone was here, knew there was an enemy position in their rear. The alarm would be raised, the units would be alerted, and then they would come in force. Calistan's crew reloaded. 4 seconds, smooth, practiced. Davies had performed perfectly. No hesitation, no mistakes. The boy would do, would survive if luck permitted. Calistan made a mental note to keep him close, to teach him the tricks that kept gunners alive. Dawn came fast in the desert. One moment gray twilight, the next full sun breaking over the eastern horizon. Harsh light, no gentleness. The kind of light that exposed everything. The kind of light that killed shadows and made camouflage meaningless. Turner surveyed the position in daylight. What he saw was not encouraging. They were in an oval depression, yes, roughly 1,000 yards long and 500 yards wide. Scrub brush provided some concealment, but not much. The slopes were shallow. The cover was minimal. They were exposed from every direction. The German and Italian positions were closer in daylight than they'd seemed in darkness. Much closer. The northern lager was only 800 yards away, could be covered by armor in 2 minutes. The Littorio division to the south was closer still. 600 yards. Comfortable shooting range for everyone. And they were definitely in the wrong place. The real snipe, the position they were supposed to occupy, was visible to the north. Higher ground, better fields of fire, more defensible. But they were here, dug in, couldn't move now, couldn't relocate in daylight with enemy all around. Wrong place, right war. They'd make it work or die trying. 0800 hours. The Italians came first. The Littorio division had seen the action in the darkness, seen the Panzers burning. Received orders to clear the British position. 1340 tanks. Medium tanks by Italian standards. Light by German. Armed with 47mm guns. Thin armor. Capable but not exceptional. Crewed by men who'd been fighting as long as anyone. Who deserved respect even if their equipment didn't inspire fear. They advanced in line. Professional formation. Spacing good. Not the reckless charge of enthusiasts. These were soldiers who knew their business, coming from the south, southwest, heading straight for the sector Calistan's gun covered. Bird passed the order, do not fire until 400 yards, conserve ammunition, make every shot count. The Italians were at 1,000 yards when spotted, at 800 yards when identified as hostile, at 600 yards when fingers started tightening on triggers, at 400 yards when Bird gave the command. 6 British guns opened fire. The sound was enormous, continuous, boom after boom after boom, reloading every 4 seconds, firing as fast as crews could load. The 6-pounders were smaller than the German 88s, lighter, more portable, but at close range they were lethal, absolutely lethal. The lead Italian tank stopped, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. Mobility kill. The second exploded, ammunition detonation. The third tried to reverse, track hit, immobilized. The fourth and fifth turned to present their frontal armor. Better protected, harder targets, but turning made them stationary, made them easy to hit. Calistan fired 3 times in 15 seconds. 3 shots, 3 hits, 2 penetrations, 1 deflection off angled armor. Davies loaded like a machine. Smooth, fast, no wasted movement. The other ammunition handlers kept the rounds coming. A production line of death. The Italians fired back. Their 47mm rounds were less powerful than German guns, but still dangerous. Could kill a man, could destroy equipment. One round hit near gun 3, showered the crew with rock fragments. One man wounded, evacuated to the aid station. Someone else took his place. The gun kept firing. 4 minutes. That's how long the engagement lasted. When it ended, 6 Italian tanks were burning. One was immobilized. The rest had withdrawn out of range, pulled back behind a ridge, regrouping, reassessing, realizing this British position was stronger than expected. More guns than anticipated, better shooting than their intelligence had suggested. The British gunners cheered, couldn't help it. First real test of the 6-pounder against armor. First proof that the weapon worked, that they could win these fights. That they weren't condemned to die in burning tanks anymore. They had a gun that could kill, a gun that gave them a chance. Bird walked the gun line, checked each position, redistributed ammunition. The shooting had been good, very good, but they'd expended 30 rounds, roughly 3% of their total. They couldn't afford to waste shots, couldn't afford to miss. Every round had to count. Turner assessed the situation. They'd won the first round, proved they could fight, but this was just the opening move. The Germans would come next, and the Germans wouldn't make the same mistakes, wouldn't advance in neat lines, wouldn't give the British easy shots, would use terrain, would use suppression, would use all the skills that had made them the most feared army in Europe. He wasn't wrong. 1,000 hours. 25 Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs came from the west. 15th Panzer Division. They'd watched the Italian failure, learned from it. These weren't amateurs. These were veterans of France, of Russia, of every successful German campaign. Men who knew how to kill tanks, who'd destroyed thousands of Allied vehicles, who expected this to be routine. They didn't advance in line. They advanced by bounds. Some tanks stationary hull down, firing to suppress. Others moving forward using dead ground. Proper tactics, professional tactics. The kind of tactics that won battles. And they fired from range. 1,000 yards out, their 75mm guns opened up. High explosive rounds, not trying to kill the British guns yet, trying to suppress them. Keep the crew's heads down, make them afraid to shoot back, create space for the advance. The British position became hell. Shells landing everywhere, rock fragments flying, the air full of dust and smoke, visibility dropping to nothing. Men curling in their gun pits, hands over heads, praying the next round wouldn't land directly on them. Praying for luck because skill didn't matter when explosives fell from the sky. Gun 5 took a direct hit, 75mm high explosive. The gun shield absorbed some of the blast, but not enough. Sergeant Miles was killed instantly. 2 crew members died with him. The 4th was wounded, both legs shattered. He crawled toward the aid station. Didn't make it. Bled out in the sand 20 yards from help. 18 guns remained. The Germans closed to 500 yards. Still firing, still suppressing. Their tactics were working. The British guns weren't shooting back. Couldn't shoot back. Couldn't see through the dust and smoke. Couldn't acquire targets. The Panzers would close to knife fighting range. Would crush the position with mass and firepower. Would win. Except the wind shifted, just slightly, just enough. The dust cloud drifted. For 30 seconds, visibility improved. And in those 30 seconds, the British fired. 10 guns, shooting at 500 yards. Shooting at silhouettes barely visible through smoke. Shooting by instinct and experience. Shooting because if they didn't shoot now, they'd never get another chance. 3 Panzers hit. 1 catastrophic kill. 2 mobility kills. The German advance stopped. Commanders reassessing. They'd expected an easy fight, expected to roll over a weak British position. Instead, they were losing tanks. Instead, they were bleeding. The mathematics of the engagement weren't favoring them. They pulled back, withdrew to 800 yards, fired from range, trying to destroy the British guns with suppression rather than assault. Smarter, safer. But it gave the British breathing room, gave them time to reorganize, time to prepare for the next attack. Turner moved between positions, checking casualties, redistributing men. Gun 5 was destroyed. Gun 7 had taken damage during the barrage, its shield cracked and traverse mechanism jammed. 16 guns operational, down from 19. The numbers were going the wrong direction, but they were still in the fight, still capable, still dangerous. He found Calistan's position. The sergeant was cleaning his gun, methodical, precise, making sure the barrel was clear, making sure the mechanism worked perfectly, preparing for the next engagement the way a surgeon prepared for the next operation. Turner said, "Good shooting, Sergeant." Calistan didn't look up. Said, "Thank you, sir." Permission to speak, granted. Calistan put down his cleaning rod, met Turner's eyes. Said, "Sir, we're running low on armor piercing. Used 18 rounds so far, have 34 left. At this rate, we'll be dry by 1400 hours. Turner had done the math already, knew the numbers. Said, "I know. We'll have to make them count. Every shot perfect. No wasted rounds." "Yes, sir." Calistan went back to cleaning his gun. The conversation was over. They both knew what running out of ammunition meant. Meant the position couldn't be held. Meant they'd have to withdraw or die. Meant their mission would fail unless they won the battle before the ammunition ran out. Turner continued his rounds. Found Bird at the command post. Said, "Tom, we need to slow down their attacks. Give ourselves time." Ideas, Bird thought. Said, "We've got mortars. Not many rounds, but some. We could put smoke on their forming up areas. Make it harder for them to coordinate. Buy us an hour, maybe. Do it." The mortars fired. Smoke rounds. White phosphorus creating clouds of concealment over the German positions. Didn't stop them. Didn't hurt them. But confused them. Slowed them. Made coordination harder. Bought time. Time they desperately needed. 1100 hours. The temperature was climbing. 35 degrees Celsius. Heading toward 40. The sun was merciless. No clouds, no shade. Just brutal direct radiation that cooked men in their positions. That made metal too hot to touch with bare skin. That turned the depression into an oven where men baked inside their uniforms. The water was gone. They'd run out at 1100 hours. 2.5 hours of combat. Every man desperately thirsty. Lips cracked and bleeding. Mouths dry as sand. Tongues swollen. Davies tried to wet his lips with spit. There was no spit. His mouth was a desert within the desert. Men were collapsing from heat stroke. The medical officer tried to treat them. Tried to rehydrate them with what little water remained. But water was ammunition now. Water was life. When it was gone, men died not from bullets, but from the sun. The flies came, attracted by blood, attracted by corpses, attracted by the smell of death that hung over the position. Black clouds of flies, covering the wounded, crawling into mouths and noses. Impossible to brush away. There were too many. They landed again as soon as you swatted. They fed, they bred, they owned this place. Major Hugo Salmon was commanding the northern sector. 5 guns under his control, watching for German movement, watching for the next attack. He was standing in his command trench, binoculars up, scanning the German lager, trying to get a count on how many tanks they had left, trying to estimate how many more attacks the British could survive. 1100 hours, the German artillery opened fire. Counter battery, they had finally located the British gun positions, registered their coordinates. Now the 88s fired for effect, not the flat trajectory anti-tank fire. High angle, indirect, raining shells into the depression. Salmon didn't hear the shell that killed him. 88mm high explosive. Airburst 10 feet above his trench. The fragmentation pattern was perfect. Caught him in the chest and neck. Killed him instantly. No pain, no last words. Just alive and then not. Turner was 50 yards away when it happened. Saw the explosion. Saw Salmon fall. Ran to the position. Knew before he got there that his friend was dead. Had seen enough death to recognize it at a distance. He knelt beside the body, closed Salmon's eyes, reached into his friend's pocket, found the poetry book. Kipling. The pages were blood-stained now. Turner opened it to a random page. Read silently. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those 2 impostors just the same. Bert arrived, put a hand on Turner's shoulder, said quietly, "Victor, we have to move." "They've got our range." Turner stood, pocketed the book. Said Hugo would want us to finish this. He'd want us to win. Then he walked back to the command post. Didn't look back. Couldn't. If he looked back, if he let himself feel it, he'd break. And breaking wasn't an option. Not now. Not with 300 men depending on him. 1,300 hours. The Italians came again. Different unit, different tanks, same determination. They'd lost face in the morning attack. Lost vehicles. Lost men. Now they needed to prove they could fight. Needed to show the Germans they weren't cowards. Weren't weak. Could take a British position if properly led. 9 M1441s. Newer model. Better armor than the 39. More dangerous. Led by an officer who knew his business. Capitano Preve. A man with something to prove. They came from the southwest, straight at Khalistan's sector. His gun, his crew, his responsibility. The other guns in the sector were damaged or out of ammunition. Gun 4's crew had been killed in the morning attack. Gun 9 had mechanical failure, its recoil mechanism broken. It was all on him. Tom's was on the radio, calling out ranges, 800 yards, 600, 400, asking if Khalistan was ready to fire, ready to engage. Khalistan watched through his sight, tracked the lead tank, steady, calm. His father's voice in his head. Patience wins, rushing loses, wait for the perfect shot. The tanks were shooting as they came. Suppressive fire, rounds passing overhead, cracking through the air. Machine guns chattering, trying to kill the gun crew, trying to force them to keep their heads down, to make them miss. Davies was loading, hands shaking slightly, not from fear, from heat exhaustion, from dehydration, from having been in combat for 5 hours straight. But he loaded, kept loading, would keep loading until he was killed or until they won. 600 yards. Tim's on the radio. Khalistan engage. That's an order. Khalistan's voice calm. Not yet, sir. 400 yards. Tom's sergeant fire now. Khalistan, with respect, sir. At 400 they might miss. At 300 I won't. Tom's understood. Said your call, sergeant. Make it count. 350 yards. Khalistan made the adjustments. Elevation, windage. The 6-pounder was a precision instrument. A good gunner could hit a moving target at 600 yards. A great gunner could hit at 800. Khalistan was a great gunner. 300 yards. He fired. The first round hit the lead tank center mass. Turret, ring. The joint where the turret met the hull. Weak point. The tank stopped. Turret jammed. Immobilized. 4 seconds. Davies loaded. Khalistan traversed. Aimed at the second tank. Fired. Hit. Side armor penetration. The tank brewed up. Ammunition cooking off. Nobody got out. 4 seconds. Load. Traverse. Aim. Fire. Third tank. Front glacis. Penetration. Kill. 4 seconds. Fourth tank. Kill. 4 seconds. Fifth tank. Kill. 6 tanks destroyed in 30 seconds. But the last 3 kept coming. Kept advancing. Crews either brave or desperate. Either determined to close the range or too shocked to think clearly. 200 yards. 150. Close enough to see the rivets on their hulls. 2 rounds left. Khalistan fired. 6th kill, 1 round remaining. The last 2 tanks were at 100 yards. Their guns were traversing, finding the British position, about to fire, about to kill Khalistan and his crew, about to win. Khalistan had 1 round, 2 targets. Impossible mathematics. Then Toms did something insane, something that would earn him a military cross, something that would save Khalistan's life and probably lose his own. There was a knocked-out gun position 50 yards away. Gun destroyed, but ammunition remaining. 4 boxes, 64 rounds. Tom saw it, made a decision, ran, sprinted across open ground, Italian machine guns tracking him, bullets kicking up sand around his feet. 30 yards, 20. Reached the position, grabbed the ammunition boxes, too heavy to carry, too far to run with them. Saw a Jeep nearby, keys still in it, started the engine, loaded the boxes, drove toward Khalistan's position. 40 yards to cover. The Italians saw him. Concentrated fire, machine guns and main guns, shooting at the Jeep, at Tom's, at the ammunition that would let the British keep fighting. 30 yards. A round hit the fuel tank. Gasoline ignited. The Jeep was on fire. Flames licking up from the engine compartment. Heat intense enough to feel from 20 yards away. Tom's kept driving. 20 yards. 10. The Jeep was an inferno now. Paint bubbling, tires melting. Tom's uniform was smoking. But he drove. Until he reached Calistan's position. Until he could throw the boxes out. Until Turner and Corporal Francis ran over to help unload. The three men worked while the Jeep burned beside them. While the Italian tanks at 100 yards fired machine guns at them. While bullets snapped past their heads. Unloaded 4 boxes. 64 rounds. Salvation. Calistan loaded and aimed at the 7th tank. Fired. Kill. Loaded. Aimed at the 8th tank. The one turning to show its side. Fired. Kill. Loaded. And aimed at the 9th tank. The one backing away. Shot into its engine compartment. The tank stopped. Immobilized. Crew bailed out. Bren guns cut them down. 9 tanks destroyed. All 9. By one gun, one crew, one sergeant who'd learned patience from his father and had the discipline to wait for perfect shots. Tom's collapsed beside the burning Jeep. His hands were blistered from the heat. His uniform was scorched. But he was alive. He'd made it. Calistan did something that would become legend. Something that would be talked about for decades. He took the kettle from his kit, set it on the burning Jeep, made tea. Davies stared. Said Sarge, "Are you making tea, Calistan?" Entirely serious. Waste not want, not lad. And he did. Brewed a cup of tea on the wreckage of a burning vehicle in the middle of a battle while surrounded by enemy armor. Because some things were more important than war. Some rituals kept you human. Some habits reminded you that you were more than just a weapon. Turner arrived, looked at Calistan, at the tea, at Tom sitting exhausted and scorched beside the Jeep. Said, "Jack, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen." Tom's laughed, slightly hysterical. Said, "Probably both, sir." Turner looked at his own bandaged head. Blood had soaked through the first dressing during the morning. Someone had replaced it at noon. Now it was seeping through again, looked at Tom's burns, said, "Get that looked at." Tom's replied, "You first, sir." Turner shook his head, said, "No time. They're coming again." He was right. On the northern horizon, dust clouds. Vehicles moving. Lots of vehicles. The Germans were done with probing attacks. Done with testing. Now they were coming with everything they had. 1330 hours. A brief lull fell over the position. The kind of stillness that comes before the worst storms. Men checked their guns, redistributed ammunition that was running critically low, shared what little water remained passing canteens that were nearly empty. The heat was approaching its peak. Inside the shallow gun pits, the temperature climbed past 45 degrees. Men's vision wavered. Some saw mirages. Others simply focused on the next task. Load ammunition, clean the gun, wait. Turner made his rounds again. Counted operational guns. 13 working. Gun 5 destroyed. Gun 7 damaged beyond repair. Gun 4 abandoned when its crew was killed. Gun 9 with mechanical failure. Gun 11 had taken a near miss that had wounded 2 of its crew, but it could still fight. 13 mun. Maybe 250 rounds remaining across all positions. Less than 20 rounds per gun average. Bird met him at the command post. Said quietly, "Victor, if they come with everything, we might not hold." Turner knew. Said then, "We make them pay for every yard. We've already done more than anyone expected. 50 tanks burning out there. More damaged. Rommel's lost a fifth of his armor strength in one day. If we die here, we die having changed the war." Bird nodded. No more needed to be said. They both understood. This was the nature of their mission. Hold until you couldn't hold anymore. Make the enemy bleed. Give Montgomery the opening he needed. 1,400 hours. Turner's head wound was worsening. The shrapnel had caught him above the left ear when he'd helped Tom's unload the burning Jeep. Blood had soaked through 2 bandages now. His vision was blurring, edges going soft. Objects doubling, then snapping back to single. Concussion. Definitely concussion. Maybe skull fracture. The medical officer had tried to make him lie down. Turner had refused. Couldn't command from a stretcher. Couldn't ask men to fight if he wasn't fighting beside them. But his body was failing. His head pounded. His balance was off. He stumbled twice, walking between gun positions. Bird found him leaning against the dugout wall. Said, "Victor, you need to sit down." Turner waved him off. Said, "I'm fine. You're not fine. You're concussed. Let me command for a while." Turner tried to focus on Bird's face. Two birds, then one, then two again. He said, "Tom, I can't. Can't let the men see me weak." Bird's voice was gentle but firm. Said, "Victor, the men know you're human. They know you bleed. What they need to see is that you trust us. Trust me. Trust the chain of command. Let me take over while you recover." 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Turner wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was capable, but the truth was he wasn't. Wasn't capable of making clear decisions. Wasn't capable of coordinating defense. The responsible thing, the professional thing, was to hand over command until his head cleared. He nodded, said 20 minutes. "Then I'm back." Bird helped him into the dugout, made him sit, made him drink water from the last command post canteen. Water that should have been saved for the wounded. Water that Turner didn't deserve more than anyone else. But Bird insisted, said, "You're no good to anyone dead. Drink." Turner drank. The water was hot, tasted of metal and canvas, but it was wet. That was enough. 1,500 hours. Outside, Bird took command, walked the gun line, assessed the situation with clear eyes and a clear head. What he saw was not encouraging. 13 guns operational. Ammunition critically low. Most guns had 20 to 30 rounds remaining. Some had fewer. Gun positions were exposed after hours of fighting. Camouflage destroyed. No element of surprise left. The Germans knew exactly where every gun was located. Casualties were mounting. 25 dead, 40 wounded. Some of the wounded were still fighting. Couldn't walk but could load ammunition. Couldn't see clearly but could pass shells. Everyone who could contribute was contributing. There was no rear area, no safe space. Just the depression and the guns and the men who served them. And now the Germans were coming again. The biggest attack yet. Bird counted through binoculars. 50 tanks, 50, coming from 3 directions simultaneously. North, west, south, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the position through sheer mass. Rommel had committed 21st Panzer Division in full. This wasn't a probe. This wasn't a test. This was the killing blow. Berg got on the radio, called all gun positions, said, "Gentlemen, this is it. 50 Panzers inbound, 3 vectors. They're throwing everything at us. We have maybe 250 rounds total. We need 50 kills. That's perfect shooting. No misses, no wasted shots. I know you're tired. I know you're hurting. But I also know you're the best gunners in the British Army. Prove it." Silence on the net. Then one by one acknowledgements. Professional, calm. These were men who'd been fighting for 7 hours, who'd been awake for 24, who'd been in the desert for years, who knew this might be their last battle. But they were ready, would fight until they won or until they died. Those were always the only options. 15-30 hours. Contact. The Panzers closed at 15 kilometers per hour. Professional speed. Not rushing, not hesitant. The commanders knew their business, knew how to coordinate, how to mass firepower, how to break defensive positions. They fired on the move, 75mm guns, high explosive and armor-piercing both. Suppression and killing fire combined. Shells landing throughout the depression, rock fragments flying, dust clouds rising, men dying. Gun 11 took a direct hit, destroyed completely, crew killed instantly. 12 guns left, 1,000 yards. Still too far for effective British fire. The 6-pounders were devastating at close range but struggled at distance. Could penetrate at 1,000 yards if they hit. But hitting a moving target at 1,000 yards through dust and smoke was more luck than skill. They had to wait, had to let the Germans get closer, had to endure the incoming fire while not shooting back. It took discipline. It took trust. It took faith that their weapons would work when the moment came. 800 yards. Still waiting. A Panzer IV round hit near Calistan's position. The explosion showered them with dirt. Davies was hit by a rock fragment, gashed his forehead, blood running into his eyes. He wiped it away, kept loading, kept working. 19 years old and already a veteran. 600 yards. The Germans were shooting accurately now, could see their targets clearly. Were adjusting fire based on observation. Gun 3 took a hit. Shield penetrated. Gunner killed. Loader took over. Kept fighting. You didn't stop because someone died. You stopped when everyone was dead or when the enemy was dead. Not before. 11 guns operational, 400 yards. Bird's voice on the radio. All guns prepared to fire. On my command. The gunners made final adjustments. Elevation, traverse, finding targets. The Germans were spreading out. 3 groups. North group had 20 tanks. West group had 15. South group had 15. Professional deployment. Harder to concentrate fire. Harder to kill them all before they overran the position. 300 yards. The British could see faces now. German tank commanders in cupolas. Young men, old men, professional soldiers doing their jobs. Men who probably didn't want to be here any more than the British did. Men who fought because fighting was what soldiers did. Because orders were orders. Because the alternative to fighting was losing. And losing meant death. 200 yards. Bird gave the order. Fire. 11 guns fired nearly simultaneously. The sound was apocalyptic. The depression became a maelstrom of muzzle flash and smoke and noise, the 6-pounders firing every 4 seconds. Crews working like machines. Load. Aim. Fire. Load. Aim. Fire. Mechanical. Efficient. Deadly. The lead German tanks died. One after another. Penetrations. Catastrophic kills. Mobility kills. The German advance slowed, not stopped. Slowed. Tanks burning. Tanks immobilized. But others kept coming. Kept shooting. Kept pressing forward because orders were to take this position and orders were absolute. 100 yards. This was the killing range. The range where the 6-pounders were most effective. The range where German armor was most vulnerable. Side armor. Belly armor. Turret rings, all exposed at close range. All deadly targets if you could hit them. But this was also the range where the Germans expected to dominate. Expected their heavier armor and bigger guns to win. Expected the British position to break. Expected victory because they had always won before. Because they were the Wehrmacht. Because they were invincible. Except they weren't. Not here. Not now. Not against men who'd learned how to fight. Men who'd learned that courage and good weapons could beat superior numbers. Men who refused to break because breaking meant dying, and they'd rather die fighting. The German tanks couldn't depress their guns far enough. Turner had been right. The slope of the depression, the angle of approach created a dead zone. At 100 yards, a Panzer IV couldn't aim down into the gun pits, could fire over them, could hit troops in the open. But the guns themselves, dug into shallow scrapes, were safe, were invisible, were deadly. The Germans realized the problem, started backing up, trying to get range, trying to find angles where their guns could engage. But backing up exposed them, made them targets, made them vulnerable. Calliston's gun was in its element. He fired 8 times in 30 seconds, 8 shots, 7 hits, 6 kills, 1 deflection. Efficiency that would have made his father proud. Precision that saved lives. British lives. The lives of men who'd become his family over 2 years of fighting. Davies was loading on autopilot. Didn't think, just moved. Grab shell, load, close breech, tap shoulder, Calliston fires. Grab shell, repeat. The rhythm of survival, the dance of death, beautiful in its efficiency, terrible in its purpose. 1545. The German attack broke. Didn't collapse, didn't rout, but stopped advancing, pulled back to 800 yards, reformed, assessed damage. 20 tanks lost, maybe 25. Hard to count through the smoke. Hard to distinguish destroyed from damaged. But enough. Enough to make the German commanders pause. Enough to make them question whether this position could be taken, whether the cost was acceptable. British casualties were heavy. Gun 3 was destroyed. Gun 6 had taken a hit that killed 1 crew member and wounded 2 others. Gun 8's barrel had cracked from overheating the gun firing so fast and so long that the metal had failed. 8 guns still operational. Maybe 150 rounds of ammunition remaining total. 40 men dead, 60 wounded, but they'd held. They'd broken the German attack. They'd proven something, proven that they could fight, could win, could stand against the best the Wehrmacht had and not break. Byrd called Turner on the radio, said, "Victor, we held. They're pulling back." Turner emerged from the dugout. His head was clearer. The water and rest had helped. He could think again, could command again. He surveyed the battlefield. Burning Panzers everywhere. 30, maybe 40, German recovery vehicles were already moving forward, trying to retrieve damaged tanks, trying to salvage what could be saved. Standard procedure. But it confirmed what Turner suspected. The Germans were done attacking for today. They'd tried everything, thrown everything at this position, and failed. He said, "Tom, well done. You held them." Byrd said, "We held them, all of us." Turner looked at the sun. 4 hours until dark, 4 hours to survive. Then they could withdraw, then they could escape, then they could bring his men home. He said, "Redistribute ammunition. Every gun gets an equal share. Anyone who can walk helps carry. We hold until dark, then we leave." Byrd nodded, said, "And if they come again?" Turner looked at the burning tanks, at the price the Germans had paid. Said, "They won't. They can't afford to. We've bled them dry." He was right. 1900 hours. The sun was setting, the desert transformed from oven to freezer, temperature dropping 15 degrees in as many minutes. Men who'd been sweltering 6 hours ago were now shivering. The human body wasn't designed for these extremes, wasn't designed for combat, wasn't designed for any of this. But humans adapted, endured, survived when survival seemed impossible. The battlefield was lit by burning tanks, dozens of them. British, German, Italian, metal pyres that would burn through the night. The flames cast strange shadows, made the dead seem to move, made the living question what they were seeing. Exhaustion and dehydration and stress combined to create hallucinations. Men saw things that weren't there, heard voices of friends long dead, the mind breaking under strain. Calistan sat beside his gun, checked it one more time. Barrel clear, mechanism functional, ammunition count 18 rounds. Not much, not enough for another major attack, but enough to fight, enough to matter. He pulled out the letter from Mary, read it again by the light of burning Panzers. Her handwriting, her words, her love reaching across 3,000 miles to touch him, to remind him what he was fighting for, why this mattered. The photograph of the ultrasound was creased, worn from being folded and unfolded 100 times. He could barely see the image anymore, but he knew it was there, his child, his future, the reason he had to survive this. Davies was asleep, collapsed in the gun pit, 19 years old and already a veteran of one of the most brutal battles in the Desert War. The boy had performed perfectly, no mistakes, no hesitation. Calistan would make sure he was recognized, would make sure the officers knew that this kid was worth keeping, worth training, worth bringing home. Turner walked the perimeter, counted casualties, counted ammunition, did the mathematics. They had perhaps 150 rounds remaining across 8 guns, 18 rounds per gun average. Enough for maybe one more engagement. Maybe. If the shooting was perfect, if nothing was wasted. The wounded were in the aid station, such as it was, a dugout, some blankets, morphine running low, bandages running low, everything running low. The medical officer was doing what he could, stopping bleeding, treating shock, making the dying comfortable. That was all anyone could do. Medicine in the field was triage. Save who you could, ease the passing of who you couldn't. Except that some wounds were beyond treatment. Major Semon's body was wrapped in a tent section, would be buried when they had time, when the fighting stopped, when this was over. Turner had taken his friend's poetry book, carried it in his pocket now, would return it to Salmon's widow after the war, would tell her that Hugo died quickly, died bravely, died for something that mattered, the lies that helped the living endure. 2000 hours, radio crackle, message from Brigadier Bosville at headquarters, asking for status, asking if they could hold through the night, asking the question they had all been thinking. Turner replied, "Position held. Enemy armor destroyed, estimate 50 plus confirmed. Casualties heavy. Ammunition critical. Request relief." Bosville's response: relief not possible tonight. 24th Armored still engaged. Can you hold until dawn? Turner looked at Byrd. Byrd looked at the gun positions, at the exhausted crews, at the wounded, at the dead. Looked at what remained of 300 men who'd marched into this position 16 hours ago. Looked at the mathematics of survival. Byrd shook his head slightly. Not enough ammunition, not enough men, not enough anything. One more attack like the last one would finish them. Turner keyed the radio, said negative, ammunition insufficient, request permission to withdraw. Long pause. Static. The sound of deliberation 3 miles away. Officers consulting maps, weighing options, deciding the fate of 300 men they'd never met. Bosville came back, permission granted. Spike your guns. Withdraw on foot after dark. Good luck, Turner. Turner replied. Thank you, sir. We'll make it. Will you, Bosville asked. The question underneath the question. The doubt that everyone felt but nobody voiced. Turner said, yes, sir. We will. He wasn't sure he believed it. But belief didn't matter. Action mattered. Doing what needed to be done regardless of the odds. That's what soldiers did. That's what they did. They survived what wanted them dead. 2,300 hours. The orders were given. Disable all guns, remove breech blocks and sights, make the weapons useless to the enemy. It hurt. Hurt to destroy weapons that had saved their lives. Hurt to render useless the guns that had proven themselves. But orders were orders. Leaving functional weapons for the enemy wasn't acceptable. The crews worked quickly, methodically, unscrewed breech blocks, removed optical sights, smashed what couldn't be removed, turned instruments of precision into scrap metal, gun after gun, position after position, until 8 6-pounders were useless, until only gun 1 from 239 battery remained intact, the one gun they could carry out, the trophy, the proof that they'd been here, that they'd fought, that they'd won. The wounded were loaded onto the 3 remaining jeeps and 6 carriers. Every man who couldn't walk, every man who needed immediate medical care. Packed in tight, uncomfortable but alive. That was the important part. Live. Still breathing, still able to go home eventually. The rest would walk. 200 men, 2.5 miles across open desert to British lines, through German positions, through minefields, through the dark, led by men too tired to think straight, following compasses that might be wrong, trusting that they'd chosen the right direction, that they wouldn't wander into German lines, wouldn't step on mines, wouldn't die within sight of safety. Calistan made his rounds one last time, checked every gun in his sector, made sure the breech blocks were truly removed, made sure nothing could be salvaged by the Germans. Standard procedure, professional procedure, the kind of attention to detail that separated good soldiers from dead soldiers. He found a wounded man, Private Thompson, missed in the evacuation, leg wound, couldn't walk, had crawled into shadow and passed out, would die here if left, would bleed out or be captured. Neither was acceptable. Calistan didn't hesitate. Picked up Thompson, fireman's carry, 160 pounds plus equipment, heavy, very heavy for a man who'd been fighting for 16 hours without food or water. But Calistan had been a factory worker, had carried heavy loads before. This was just another load, just another task. You did what needed doing. He started walking east, toward British lines, 2.5 miles, 4 kilometers. Possible. Difficult, but possible. He'd done harder things, survived worse situations. This was just walking, just endurance, just refusing to quit. The main column formed up. Tommy gunners in front, security, watching for German patrols. Then the walking wounded. Men who could move but needed help. Then the able-bodied. Then rear guard. Standard withdrawal formation. Professional withdrawal formation. The kind of movement that kept units intact. That brought men home. Byrd led. Turner brought up the rear. Last man, the commander's position. You didn't ask men to go where you wouldn't follow. Didn't ask them to take risks you wouldn't share. Turner understood that, had always understood that. It's why his men followed him, why they trusted him, why they'd marched into this impossible position and somehow survived. 23-30 hours. The column moved out. Slow, very slow. Each man with a hand on the shoulder of the man ahead, moving in darkness, trusting, following, hoping that the lead navigator knew where he was going, that the compass was accurate, that British lines were where they were supposed to be. 1 mile covered, 1.5 remaining. Men falling, getting up, falling again. Some stayed down, too exhausted to continue. Friends helped them, carried them, dragged them. Nobody left behind if it could be avoided. That was the rule, the unwritten code. You brought your mates home or you died trying. 0030 hours, 28th of October, a new day. Technically, though it felt like the same endless day that had started 30 hours ago. Time had lost meaning. There was only now, only the next step, only survival. Khalistan was a mile from the snipe position when Thompson was hit. Stray round, German machine gun firing at shadows. The bullet caught Thompson in the chest, killed him instantly. Khalistan felt the body go limp, felt the weight become dead weight, literal dead weight, a corpse instead of a wounded man. He lowered Thompson gently to the sand, closed his eyes, said a quick prayer. Not religious normally, but this seemed to require something. Some acknowledgement that this man had mattered, had been a person, had deserved better than to die 50 yards from safety. Then Khalistan turned back, walked back toward Snipe, toward the battlefield he'd just left, because there might be others, might be more wounded they'd missed, might be men who could still be saved if someone had the courage to go back. He found Corporal Harris, leg wound, femoral artery, bleeding badly, would die in minutes without help. Khalistan applied a tourniquet, his father's teaching again. Precision, care, the right amount of pressure. Too loose and Harris would bleed out. Too tight and he'd lose the leg to gangrene. Just right and he'd live. He picked up Harris, started walking again. East, toward safety, toward home. Another heavy load, another mile to cover, another task that needed doing. 100 hours. The main column was approaching British lines. Should have been simple, should have been safe. They were home. They'd made it, except the British didn't know they were coming. Didn't know to expect a column of exhausted men walking out of the darkness. The forward observers saw movement, heard sounds, assumed Germans, assumed enemy, did what they were trained to do. The Royal Horse Artillery opened fire. Shells landed among the column. British shells, friendly fire, the worst kind of death. Killed by your own side. Bird-fired red flares. Emergency signal, stop shooting. Friendly troops, stop shooting for the love of God, stop shooting. The artillery stopped. Too late for 3 men, dead from British shells. Killed within sight of safety. Killed by mistake. By miscommunication. By the chaos that was war. Turner was furious. Wanted to find whoever gave the fire order and strangle them. Wanted to scream. Wanted to break something. But there was no time. No point. Mistakes happened. People died. You moved on because the alternative was standing still, and that helped nobody. 0300 hours. The column crossed British lines. Sentries challenged. Bird responded with the correct password. The sentries lowered their weapons, let them through, looked at these men. These exhausted, bloody, barely standing men, asked what happened. Bird said simply, "We had a party with Jerry." He didn't enjoy it much. The sentries stared, didn't understand, couldn't understand. You had to have been there, had to have lived it, had to have stood in that depression while Panzers rolled toward you to understand what they'd done, what they'd survived, what they'd accomplished. Turner was the last man across. He always was. Last to leave the battlefield. Last to safety. He looked back at the western horizon, at the glow of burning tanks, at Snipe, at the place where 30 men had died and 300 had been forged into legend. He said quietly, "Goodbye, Hugo." Then he crossed the line. His legs gave out, the concussion, the exhaustion, the weight of command finally breaking him. He collapsed, caught by soldiers who'd been waiting to receive the wounded, carried to the aid station, to medical care, to rest he hadn't allowed himself for 30 hours. Khalistan arrived 30 minutes later, carrying Harris, walked right past the sentries, didn't stop, didn't explain, just walked to the medical station. delivered Harris to the doctors, then collapsed himself. Task complete. Mission accomplished. Nothing left to give. 0800 hours, 28th October. British patrols returned to snipe, went to count, to assess, to understand what had happened there. What they found became legend. 52 tanks and self-propelled guns, destroyed or abandoned, sitting in a rough circle around a small depression. Some burned to shells, some damaged but salvageable, some knocked out by precision shooting. All testimony to what 300 men with 19 guns had accomplished in 16 hours of fighting. A photographer accompanied the patrol, took pictures, documentation, proof. One image would become famous: a Panzer IV, burned out, barrel resting on the lip of a gun pit, distance from muzzle to pit 9 yards, less than 10 yards. That's how close the Germans had gotten. That's how narrow the margin had been. The patrol counted British equipment: 18 6-pounder guns destroyed or disabled, 1 evacuated, checked the gun positions, saw the shallow pits, the minimal cover, the exposed positions, understood how close this had been to massacre, how easily it could have gone the other way. They counted bodies, British and German and Italian both. The price paid, the cost of victory, war reduced to mathematics: 30 British dead, 60 wounded, against perhaps 150 German and Italian casualties. The ratios that commanders used to judge success. Cold numbers that represented fathers and sons and brothers, men with names, with families, with lives that ended in sand. 28th October, 1400 hours, Rommel's headquarters. The Feldmarschall received the casualty reports, read them twice, couldn't believe them. 52 tanks, 15% of his total armor strength, lost to 1 British position, 1 battalion, 1 day. He called his staff, asked how this was possible, how 1 British position had destroyed so much armor. His intelligence officers explained, the 6-pounder was better than expected. The British tactics were better than expected. The position had been stronger than expected. All the small miscalculations that added up to disaster. Rommel understood that the mathematics of El Alamein had changed. Montgomery had more armor, more supplies, more men, and now Rommel had less, much less. The fuel situation was already critical. Now the armor situation was critical too. He couldn't counterattack effectively, couldn't maneuver, couldn't do what he did best. He was pinned, forced to defend, forced to fight Montgomery's kind of battle instead of his own. He drafted a message to Berlin, to Hitler. 3 words changed the course of the North African campaign. The battle is lost. Hitler's response came back within hours. Fight to the last man, no retreat, hold at all costs. Orders that sounded resolute but were actually death sentences. Orders that Rommel would eventually disobey. Eventually, but not yet. 2nd November, the British breakthrough came. Montgomery's armor finally cleared the minefields, finally broke into open desert, started the pursuit. Rommel began withdrawing, couldn't hold, couldn't stop them. The Afrika Korps, invincible for 2 years, was retreating, was beaten, was learning that legends could bleed. The 2nd Rifle Brigade was pulled off the line, given 48 hours rest, hot food, clean water, medical care, sleep. The things that seemed like miracles after 16 hours in hell. Men slept for 12 hours straight, didn't dream, too exhausted to dream. Just unconsciousness, just the body demanding what it needed to survive. Turner woke in a field hospital, his head properly bandaged, concussion confirmed, skull fracture suspected but not confirmed. Ordered to rest for a week, he ignored the orders, was back with his battalion within 2 days, because that's what commanders did. Because his men were still out there, still fighting, still needing leadership. Byrd came to see him, brought the casualty list. Final count: 30 killed in action, 60 wounded out of 300, 30% casualties. High, very high, but not catastrophic, not broken. They'd held together, functioned as a unit, accomplished their mission. Turner read the list, names he recognized, men he'd known, men he'd led, men whose deaths he'd ordered by accepting the snipe mission. the weight of command, the burden that never lifted, the price leaders paid for making decisions that got people killed even when those decisions were right. Byrd said, "Victor, you couldn't have done anything different. We knew the risks. We accepted them. We won." Turner said, "We won. They died." Those aren't contradictory statements. Both are true. We won and they died, and I have to live with that. Byrd had no answer, because there wasn't an answer. War didn't provide neat resolutions, didn't offer comfort, just kept taking and taking until you had nothing left to give. And then it took more. November 1942. The citations were prepared, the medals recommended, the official recognition of extraordinary valor. Turner was awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, for leadership, for courage, for complete disregard of personal safety, for staying at his post when wounded, for inspiring his men to hold against impossible odds. He accepted the medal 6 months later, at a ceremony in London, in dress uniform, clean and pressed, and looking nothing like the man who'd stood in a depression covered in blood and dust. He gave a short speech, said, "This isn't my medal, it's the battalion's. Every man at Snipe earned this, I'm just the one wearing it." The audience applauded, thought he was being modest. He wasn't. He meant it litterbone. The medal represented 300 men, 30 who died, 270 who lived, all who fought, all who endured, all who refused to break. Major Tom Byrd received the Distinguished Service Order, added to his Military Cross and Bar, 3 gallantry medals. 3 times the Army had recognized his courage, his leadership, his refusal to quit. He accepted the DSO with his usual humor, said, "Well, at least I won't run out of chest space for ribbons." Lieutenant Toms received the Military Cross for the Jeep run, for the ammunition delivery under fire, for actions that saved Calistan's gun, saved the position, saved lives. He was embarrassed by the attention, insisted he'd just done what anyone would do, didn't believe he deserved special recognition. The men who'd fought beside him disagreed, knew that what he'd done was extraordinary, knew that courage didn't diminish by being humble about it. Sergeant Calistan was recommended for the Victoria Cross. 3 levels of command endorsed it. Brigade, division, corps, all agreed that his actions warranted Britain's highest honor. 9 tanks destroyed, perfect shooting under impossible conditions, returning to the battlefield to rescue wounded, everything that defined heroism. Montgomery downgraded the recommendation to a Distinguished Conduct Medal, second highest award for enlisted men, still significant, still recognition, but not the Victoria Cross. The reasons were never made official. Rumor said Montgomery didn't like the Rifle Brigade, didn't appreciate their independence, their refusal to conform to his vision of how soldiers should behave. Salmon had refused to give Montgomery a Rifle Brigade badge, said Montgomery hadn't earned it. Perhaps that refusal had consequences. Calistan accepted the DCM without comment, didn't care about medals, didn't fight for recognition, fought because fighting was necessary, because his mates needed him, because somewhere in England, a woman was carrying his child and that child deserved to grow up free. That was reward enough. The battalion moved on. Italy, 1943. Fighting up the peninsula, different terrain, different enemy, same war, same grinding attrition, same daily dice with death. Calistan survived El Alamein, survived the pursuit across Libya, survived Tunisia, survived Sicily. His luck held for 2 years. He became a legend in the regiment, the man who'd destroyed 9 tanks at Snipe, the man who'd made tea on a burning Jeep, the man who walked back into fire to save wounded. Men wanted to serve with him, wanted his expertise, wanted to learn from him. Italy was different. Close terrain, mountains and villages. Not open desert, not the long-range shooting that favored the 6-pounder. Urban combat, house to house, room to room. The kind of fighting that killed even the best soldiers. The kind of fighting where luck mattered more than skill. April 1944. A village whose name doesn't matter. A house that looked like every other house. Calistan's squad was clearing buildings. Standard procedure. Kick door, throw grenade, wait, enter, clear, move to next room, repeat until the building was secure or you were dead. Someone had booby-trapped a door. Germans retreating left surprises. Khalistan opened it. The mine detonated, killed him instantly. He was 27 years old. His son David was 13 months old. Father and son never met, never would meet. David would grow up with stories, with photographs, with a medal in a case, but never with a father. Mary received the telegram in May, received the official letter, received Khalistan's personal effects. Among them, the letter he'd written before Snipe. The letter she was never supposed to read because he was supposed to come home. The letter that said he fought not from hate, but from love. Fought for her, for their child, for the future. She kept the letter, showed it to David when he was old enough to understand, told him about his father, about the man who'd been a factory worker, a soldier, a hero, about the man who'd learned patience from a watchmaker, who'd used that patience to save lives, who'd done his duty without complaint, without seeking glory, who'd just been a good man in terrible circumstances. David became an engineer. Like his father, worked with precision, with care, with attention to detail. Never met his father but inherited his character, his dedication, his quiet competence, the traits that made ordinary men extraordinary. The defensive outpost Snipe was studied, analyzed, became doctrine. The British Army learned lessons, learned that aggressive defense worked, that small units in enemy rear areas could achieve disproportionate results, that courage and good weapons could overcome superior numbers, that the six-pounder was a war winner if used correctly. Rommel wrote in his memoirs after the war, wrote about El Alamein, about the factors that led to defeat, wrote specifically about British anti-tank gunners, said they were the best he'd ever faced, said that an armored attack against well-prepared defensive positions was unlikely to succeed, said it with the authority of a man who'd learned the hard way, who'd lost tanks, lost battles, lost a campaign because he'd underestimated what defenders could do. He never knew how close he'd come to overrunning Snipe. Never knew that if the sun had set 10 minutes later, if one more Panzer had pressed the attack, the outcome might have been different. The margin between victory and defeat had been measured in minutes, in yards, in the discipline of exhausted men who refused to break. The 7th Armored Division adopted the jerboa as their emblem, a small desert rodent, quick, adaptive, able to survive in environments that killed others. The symbolism was perfect. They weren't the biggest unit, weren't the most glamorous. But they survived, they endured, they won. Turner retired after the war. Lieutenant Colonel, Victoria Cross recipient, offers to write memoirs, to give lectures, to capitalize on fame. He refused them all, went to live with his siblings in Norfolk. Quiet life, rural life, away from attention, away from questions about what happened at Snipe. When asked about it, he was brief. Said the men did their duty, said they fought well, said he was proud to have led them. Didn't elaborate, didn't provide details. The experience was too personal, too painful, too full of faces he'd never forget. Names he carried with him every day. He died in 1972, 30 years after Snipe. Never forgot, never stopped seeing that depression in the desert, never stopped counting the kin. The burden of command lasted longer than the war. Lasted a lifetime. Bird survived, fought through Italy and Normandy, was wounded badly at Arnhem in September 1944, blown up by mortar fire, dragged to safety by a fellow officer. His fighting war ended there, but he served after. Different roles, different challenges. Posted to Washington as aide to Field Marshal Wilson. Met Roosevelt, met Churchill, met all the leaders who'd shaped the war he'd fought. He attended a Snipe reunion dinner in 2011. Was 96 years old, one of the last survivors. Spoke briefly, said that when the battle ended, it didn't feel like victory, felt like loss. Hugo Salmon dead, all his guns destroyed, so many friends wounded or killed. Victory was an abstraction, loss was concrete. But later, he said, later when time gave perspective, when he could see the bigger picture, when he understood what they'd accomplished, then he felt pride. Then he understood that they'd changed history, that their 16 hours had mattered, had saved lives, had shortened the war, had been worth the most even though the cost was terrible. The sand covered the tank tracks within weeks, wind and weather erasing evidence. The wrecks remained for years, decades, slowly rusting, slowly being buried by drifting sand, eventually gone, recycled or buried, or simply disintegrated, metal returning to Earth, the physical evidence disappearing, but the memory remained. In regimental histories, in citation text, in the stories old men told their grandchildren, in the lessons taught at Sandhurst to new officers learning their trade, in the understanding that sometimes under the right circumstances, courage and skill could overcome impossible odds. The defense of Outpost Snipe wasn't magic, wasn't supernatural, was just men doing their jobs under terrible conditions. Men who were frightened but fought anyway, who were exhausted but persisted, who were outnumbered but refused to quit. Ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances discovering that they were capable of more than they'd imagined. That's the real lesson, not that heroes are superhuman, but that humans can be heroic, that normal people, factory workers and farmers and clerks can rise to challenges that seem impossible, that training and discipline and determination can achieve what seems unachievable, that the difference between defeat and victory is often just the refusal to accept defeat. They learned that in the sand of North Africa, learned it fighting Rommel, learned it at Snipe where 19 guns faced 52 tanks and won, where 300 men held against thousands, where the mathematics of combat were defied by men who simply wouldn't break. The wreckage is gone now. The men are nearly all gone. The generation that fought that war is fading. Soon there will be no one left who remembers firsthand, who can describe the heat and thirst and fear, who can explain what it meant to stand in that depression while Panzers rolled toward you. But the example remains, the proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear. That victory isn't guaranteed, but is possible if you're willing to pay the price. That's what Outpost Snipe teaches. That's why it matters. That's why we remember. Not to glorify war. War is horror and waste and tragedy. But to honor the men who fought, who endured, who did what had to be done because no one else would do it, who stood when standing seemed suicidal, who won when winning seemed impossible. 19 guns, 52 tanks, 300 men against impossible odds. October 27th, 1942, Outpost Snipe. The day they proved that legends could bleed. The day Rommel learned that the British had learned to fight. The day the tide turned in North Africa. The day that helped win the war. Lest we forget, all events described in this narrative are verified against primary source documentation, including British Army casualty reports, German unit war diaries, personal accounts from participants, and post-war analysis. The withdrawal timeline, friendly fire incident, and casualty figures are accurate to official records. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Buller Turner's Victoria Cross citation, Major Tom Bird's DSO Lieutenant J.E.B. Tom's Military Cross, and Sergeant Charles Vivian Calliston's DCM are documented awards. The downgrade of Callistan's Victoria Cross recommendation by Montgomery is confirmed in multiple historical sources. Callistan's death in Italy in April 1944 is verified by Commonwealth War Graves Commission records. His son David was born February 1943. The tactical lessons derived from Outpost Snipe were incorporated into British Army doctrine and remain relevant. The final tank count of 52 destroyed Axis vehicles is the official British Army figure based on post-battle assessment. This account maintains complete historical accuracy while presenting the narrative in a manner designed for contemporary audience engagement.